cactus wires, and there'd be people bringing in cream 3 times a week. It was a busy time for cream and everything.
Oh, dairy. There was dairy around here.
All dairy, except for the plain cattle. No cropping at all, there's no machinery. No machinery. 1900, or before. Hand plows like down here. Single furrow, or if you've got 3 or 4 horses, you have 4 or 5 furrows. But no machinery. So this property, when I was first born, had a horse paddock here that was cleared, and another one towards the front here that was cleared, and it could be ploughed occasionally for a crop, like oats, to feed cattle in a bit of a dry time coming up or something, but the rest of it was just like scrub. It was only when Dad took over that he began to clear it and use the crop. But anyhow,
when did the cactus go in?
Oh, about that time. And during the 1920s, the cactus was so bad that you could come here by train from Dalby, and you could not see anything over the cactus. It was higher than you could see through the railway carriage windows, everywhere, thick. And it was a total disaster. And
how long did that take to happen?
how long did it take what?
To happen?
Oh, 10 or 20 years, hasn't it?
Protein snack thing.
The cactus was an introduced thing.
Absolutely, introduced by.
Why was it brought in?
Brought in by vegetarian greenies.
All right.
Vegetarian greenies brought it in from there.
No, it was just ornamental, wasn't it?
That's right. It just went wild.
All the way out here. So,
Way out here. It was particularly out here because it was good black soil, and I just loved it. The cactuses just loved it.
But it looks pretty crap, and the fruit is pretty crap too. Why would
When
anyone
I was a
bring fruit?
boy, this horse paddock, there were 3 horses. There was a draft horse and a couple of work horses that you could ride out to the river on. But there was a plan by the government to auction off by ballot, not by money, just ballot. You could go in and have a ticket in this ballot for 400 acres of infested country, with the idea that you had to comply with the rules, which were that you would clear an acre of ground in the first year permanently, and then you would continue to progressively clear the land. And this was brought in just about the time the Cactoblastis insect was introduced, and they thought, if we can get people to actually clear some, and the Cactoblastis will help them, we'll get them problem. It actually worked over time. But at the time, my grandfather had 3 sons, so he and his 3 sons put in ballots for this particular block out there near the river. And there were only 3 or 4 other people in the ballot. Not too surprising, they won the bloody thing. And it was one in the name of my father's brother, Dick. And he took over his place, did very, very little in the way of clearing. He would pay a man to come along and ring bark trees, and he just relied on the Cactoblastis gradually getting them. And at the time Dad took over this farm, which was in the late 50s, he said to Dick, what you need to do is to get a bulldozer in, because there was, post-war, there was machinery suddenly available around the place. You can get a bulldozer in, get 20 or 30 acres bulldozed, and give it to one of the neighbours to farm for nothing the first year. Then get them to share farm, and use any money you make clearing more land. And eventually, Dick cleared most of his 400 acres just doing that. And Dad got bulldozers done here and did much the same kind of thing. And when I took over the place in 1980, about 3 years before Dad died, 86, there was still a paddock up there of about 20 acres that hadn't been cleared, and they cleared it in that particular year and gave it to one of the fair farmers to have it for a year, and he farmed it. Just ploughed around the old stumps and the roots that were still in the ground and all that, but gradually you get on top, and that's the way it works.
A friend of my sister, her mother died in the last couple of years, and went to the funeral, and one of her forebears were part of the expedition that went all around the world looking for something that would solve that problem, and they found a cactus.
Greatest bit of luck, because as you know, a cane toad was brought in to deal with the cane beetle.
Yeah.
It was a pretty
And it was
stupid idea.
total disaster.
Cane beetle that goes at the top of the cane.
And the cactoblastis moth could have been, you know, a similar disaster really, but it just turned out to be okay. The fact is that today, there is, you'll notice, especially if you drive to Chinchilla, around the Cactoblastis Memorial Hall that was built in order to
We drove past there today.
Right.
Nobody was there. It was all closed up.
Yeah, that's right. I haven't had a dance there for years. But there's quite a lot of tree cactus, just quite wild. And as Jack knows, I got him, paid him out here one day to go across that paddock, the other side of the creek, which was infested with cactus. About anything from 2 inches high to a foot high. Thousands of them all over the place. And we went across them, I gave him the poison and a little squirt gun to go just and squirt everyone. We followed the furrows up and then followed furrows back, about 6 furrows wide, and we covered the whole lot and got rid of it all. But it was that bad, and the reason is that the cactus has become evolved to be resistant to the insects to some extent.
Is it?
The insect is still here. Cactoblastis insects can be found up there in the paddock, chewing up some of these cactuses, but they only do a few leaves
And they're full.
and they're
And they're blasters.
more cactus than blastus.
They're cactus.
The cactus
Yeah.
probably poisoning them now.
So it's becoming a serious problem, but of course with the poisons we have these days, it's simple matter. Keep it under control. But anyhow, as far as the property goes, there is a street in the town named Best Street that runs directly into the public. And the house that our Uncle Dick is in, I think, might possibly have been one of the places where my great-grandfather built one of his, either the store or the pub. But he was listed in his obituary as a carpenter and butcher. And the family did own the butcher shop in town. In the main street, opposite there where the Warwick stores used to be.
Yeah.
So they were, you know, three girls and 3 boys. And there were, I think, 8 on my grandfather's side, so they all lived in the district. So they dominated the town, really.
The girls.
No.
The best.
The best family. Pretty well. My grandfather himself was 30 years a child counsellor in the days before there was any politics, and people recognised him as a decent person who would do the right thing, and they asked him to be a counsellor. And he did that for 30 years, including 2 terms as the chairman of the child council. So this is why the park is named in his honour.
It was after he took on the post run at 12.
Yeah. He was the same age as Jerry Jerome. Jerry Jerome was a famous Aborigine, and part of the readings I've read from the newspapers was that Wyre, when first founded, the earliest 1856ish, was actually an Aborigine camp.
The bathroom.
And the Aborigines were on this side of the creek, which is more prone to be less flooded than the other side because they knew that. And on this property there was a Bora Ring across the creek. But my grandfather got on very well with him, and when he was running the pub he had several of them working in the pub. One of them was Bella, and she's buried up at Bella's Hole. And he was a good friend of Jerry Jerome's, to the extent that they used to go droving together and share the proceeds. And Jerry made a name for himself as a great athlete because he used to play tennis with the local tennis team. He played cricket with the town cricket team. He played football. And he won all the bloody athletics races because they used to have little, athletics days once a year in town. All those that thought they were pretty good at it have a go, and Jerry had beat them in a foot race. So he was a great athlete.
What age would he have been?
Exactly my grandfather's age.
Yeah. What, in his 20s or something? Maybe?
Is that
That's
Bossa?
right. That's right.
Bossa was your grandfather.
That's right.
Yeah.
There's a story about Jerry in that where the tennis court is across the creek down here, no longer being used because it's resurfaced for something that was quite unsuitable. There was a 2-up school, and when the town was busy and there were a lot of people working on the railway line, there was about 10 navvies that worked the railway line and all sorts of other people around town. There was a coal mine in town for 10 years or so, just across the line from my neighbour's house here. Anyhow, there was a 2-up school, illegal of course, but they used to play on the flat just down past the tennis court, away from town, out of notice of the police. And Jerry used to come in and do work at the pub. And this particular day he was due to come and he didn't turn up. And Bosso asked one of the women, "Where's Jerry?" "Oh, couldn't come. There's no more required about it." Eventually they found out that Jerry had been to the 2-up. Lost not only his shirt but his pants as well.
Right.
He had nothing to wear to work at all.
So what was the 2-up school?
Did you make this?
You toss 2 pennies.
Ah.
It's a gambling
Yeah.
game for
Yeah.
It's the original Australian gambling game.
Yeah.
They invented it in Australia because there was nothing else for the half-drunk people to do
Yeah.
after work sometimes, and they played 2-up. And they didn't toss it in their fingers, they had a thing called a skip. They put the 2 pennies in and tossed it. And you'd bet whether it was evens or odds, that was one of the bets, whether it'd come down 2 heads or not,
Yeah.
or 2 tails. And they'd bet on it constantly.
Yeah. He
Well,
lost all
Jerry
his clothes.
wasn't good, all that smart on the maths, I don't think, and then he lost his hand.
No.
And anyhow, he became Australian boxing champion,
Mm.
Jerry.
I say Australia-wide.
Australian boxing champion.
So did you travel all around the place doing
Well,
tours
eventually he
and
went to
things?
Brisbane
Yeah.
and he fought the champion and beat him.
Oh, okay.
He said, and he used to say here, "I don't want to fight, I don't dislike any of these people." But of course, once again, people say, "Come on, Jerry, we can bet on you, we can make some money, we'll share the money with you," And there was a Francis family in town who were red-headed Irishmen, rugged type, and red-headed, bully type. An old, what was his name? I never knew him because he was just a before my time, but the father was all keen about that, my boy, And of course, boxing, it was looked on with a bit of scans too, and especially if you're going to bet on it, right? But once again, in front of the tennis courts, between the tennis courts and the railway bridge, they used to set up a boxing ring. And one of the tests at a certain stage in Jerry's career was you know, we're going to match you against the Francis boys. Oh, he wasn't too keen, you know, he didn't really want to hurt them, but he was you know, this black fella whose story's on TV the other night, what's his name?
Other fellow from the 1920s or the 1900s or whatever.
No, he's round still.
All right.
And he told them, the one that go through the ancestry.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
He's quite a popular guy on TV. Anyhow, Jerry was a bit like him, in that he's a bit of fun and athletic, so not stocky. And he didn't like to actually hit anybody, and he would dance around and just make fools of them. They'd throw a punch and he'd just see it coming, they'd throw in the air, you know, and they would really do their temper out.
Yeah.
And in this particular night, they're all sitting around, lined up on the railway bridge, sitting on the bridge, watching the old Francis guy. Father was on the top, and he's cheering his boy on. Come on, come on. And Jerry was just making a fool of him. And the old guy gets up and has a few words to say. And the Francis guy who's in the fight says to Jerry, "Stand up and fight, you black bastard." Jerry just took one hit and flattened him. Just one hit and flattened him.
A knockout.
Yeah, and the old guy fell off the bridge.
Right, okay.
I mean, the old father fell off the bridge. So,
Sounds like the Wild West does.
well, pretty bloody much. But anyhow, that was pretty much the start of Jerry's career, because Bosso's brother said, "Oh, I'll train you, Jerry, I'll train you, and you can go and make some money." But of course, he went to Brisbane and got mixed up with the bloody boxing crowd and the promoters and everybody in Brisbane. Of course, they're all smart ass bunkers. Jerry did all right, but he lost touch with Warren. In the 60s, when we were living at Camp there was an article in the paper one day where this guy, there used to be a railway line came through the Gabba and went down to the riverbank. You know where the
South Brisbane.
where the dry dock is, that they got the storage boatmen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
South Bank.
There used to be a railway, went through Gabba down to there.
Yeah.
And to get to there, the law was a railway crossing the road had to have a man in front ringing the bell.
Sorry, Asha. We just need to listen to Grandad right now.
No, I haven't.
They had to have a man in front ringing the bell. And when I worked at the bank in the Gabba,
Asha, careful of that.
about that time, sure enough, the railway trains would come across. All the traffic would stop. And the guy would come across, the red flag would ring the bell. Anyhow, one Monday, there was this article in the paper. This black fellow had been run over by a train in the middle of the night.
That sounds unlikely.
No, drunk as drunk.
No,
Drunk.
or it
Because
was murder.
South Brisbane was, because the trains used to come in, there was a meatworks. You know where South Bank is now?
Yeah.
There was a meatworks. Red Bank Meatworks, I think it was called. Big meatworks. And they would bring cattle trains in from down Warwick Way and across the border and everywhere. And they would come to that meatworks and unload their cattle nearby, and they'd unload them at another spot, but they'd bring them in and they would slaughter cattle there at that meatworks. And a lot of blackfellas were stockmen. So South Brisbane pubs were notorious in Brisbane for all the blacks. And there was a rule that they shouldn't come across to the city. They should stay on that south side of town because they were real, you know, bit feral and drunks and whatever. coming in from out in the bush, and they get paid.
Yeah.
The first thing they do is go to the pub and get drunk, right?
Yeah.
And this black fellow was mixing with that crowd a little bit, and his name was Jerome.
Right.
And I said to Dad, "This has got to be one of Jerry's children." I said, and he said, "As far as I know, Jerry never had any children, but I can tell you now that lots and lots of black fellows call themselves Jerome."
It's quite common
Yes.
that they all share
That's right.
surnames.
That's right.
Yeah, depending on where they've lived.
That's
and-
right. That's right. So he probably wasn't actually as well, but
Yeah.
that's what happened to him anyhow. So these things happen. History goes on.
Well, Jerry Jerome was Kuwait trained.
No. Thank you.
Yeah, miss.
Whoops.
Oh, sorry. Don't worry. Don't go back for me. Can you
Somebody-
pass that to Peter?
It was somebody who was calling himself Jerome, that's all.
There you go.
So there was a gay relationship in the family.
Gay relationship.
Oh, no, that's not what you said. Isn't that what you said? Did I
No.
mishear that?
Yeah, no, I didn't say that.
Oh,
They were partners.
I thought
business.
you meant partners.
No. God,
I was like, wow.
Hey, have you seen this little,
It was on the table
Pa
before.
fixed it. Pa was gluing it up.
I fixed it and she had it since then.
Well, it's lost then.
looking for it.
What is
You want to put that cord on the
Get the
ground.
rainbow bear as a substitute.
You can just put over your leg and on the ground if you like.
She's not gonna
Pull
go
it
to
out,
bed.
can you?
No, not pull it out, just put it
Gotta
down.
go with it, right?
What time?
Is that Andrew's?
Yeah, he's recording.
Does he know I'm videoing it?
Yeah, but he had
Alright.
already started that before
Alright, okay.
you started videoing.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Oh, that'll do.
Sparkly.
Come on, don't have nothing.
Can you sit on the side, Andrew?
Yes.
Philip? Can you sit on the side instead of the end?
Someone can sit here. She goes to sleep after having
So, what happened to Jerry Jerome? Did he die in Brisbane?
He meant partners as in
Yes.
I know.
lovers.
No,
Many years.
God no. Nobody did that back then unless they were
It's
Oscar
a
Wilde.
very, you know.
Pete, can you keep asking questions?
Yeah.
We're just having a cigarette and we'll be back in a minute. Camera's rolling.
Well, I don't have that many questions.
We didn't.
Do your best.
I'm not aware that the family kept much touch of him because he came under control of the
It's cold.
boxing promoters, you know.
All right, okay.
You wouldn't remember the old Brisbane Stadium. Before, what's the place now they call it? They built this entertainment centre on the side of the stadium.
Not the festival hall.
Festival Hall, yes.
It was.
Yes.
Yeah. I remember that because when we were kids, they used to have wrestling there, and they televised
right.
that, and
That's
the
right.
roller derby
That's
as
right.
well. I
Well,
think.
before that it was a stadium. And I can tell you because I have fought in that stadium.
All right.
I fought in that stadium.
You have
the old
yourself?
one. Yes,
Right. You were a boxer.
I was a boxer. Captain was boxing, Churchy. And the guy who was the coach for the boxing team at Churchy got us involved in doing GPS and other inter-school competitions involving going into the stadium itself and boxing. And I tell you, it was a dump like you've never seen. Typical of 18th and 19th, early 19th century boxing stadium, you know. You had the ring, the canvas and the ropes all around. Then there were 3 or 4 rows of seats around for the promoters and a few people who were prepared to pay a reasonable price. Then there was a great big wall of wire netting right to the ceiling.
Yeah.
And beyond that was what they call the bleachers. And all the people who were betting and boozing and brawling amongst themselves and throwing beer bottles, and this is why the netting was there, because otherwise they'd throw the beer bottles onto the ring.
Yeah.
And the dressing rooms were sort of like down the basement, underneath the bleachers all around. And they were just old brick rooms, you know, about as big as 2 or 3 toilets,
Yeah.
and every boxer would have his own dressing room and his own manager
Yeah, yeah.
and coach and so forth. And this is where you got yourself bandaged up and the gloves on, and then the dressing gown that probably had your name on the back, and of course my initials were TB.
Yes.
And there was a very famous boxer at the time, Tommy Burns.
Oh.
And when I come out with TB on the back, I went, oh, everybody's cheering, ah! You know. No, bloody well, I wasn't Tommy Burns, of course, but that's the way. Yeah,
Yeah.
Pretty-
What age were you then?
pretty primitive stuff. Oh, 70.
All right.
80.
Was that professional?
No. No, but the boxing, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
that's pretty amazing.
But as you can imagine, what went on in those dressing rooms, there were people with little bits of bike chain or something
Yeah.
tied in under the gloves. Bits of bad things were going on at times. Anyhow, back to the history. Well, that's about as much as I know, really. I can remember various stories come to mind. But, no, there was no sort of partners with the Aborigines, because they were regarded as, well, they still are, technically, anthropologically, the most backward in the world, because they come out, several thousand years ago or more, and isolated from any technology that took place in the rest of the world.
Yeah, that's right.
And not much in the way of social graces in some respects. There's the story of my grandfather and his friendship with a couple of them, and they used to have once a year they'd come to the Bunya Mountains
That's right. Yeah.
for the bunya nuts.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever eaten a bunya nut, but it's I would never class it as something worth walking 100 miles for.
Well, did they cook them or do something with them?
Oh yes, they cooked them and put them with other things and something oily, and Dad used to say they'd come across here, straggling all across all the time for quite a few weeks, and very often poor as crows, because the hard fact is, in a drought, not only did the kangaroos die in the thousands, Aborigines died, and starved to death because their native food was pretty hard to find. But they did have some tribal arrangements in that one tribe would dominate coming across one year, and another tribe would be a different tribe the following year. So they had come to arrangements about this. But there were occasions when the town, of course, had no doctors, but they did have trained nurses, retired trained nurses in the town, who people would go to if they were sick and say, what do you think and what can you do? And there was an occasion where Jerry came to my grandfather and said, look, there's a group has gone past here, and there's a very heavily pregnant woman who seems as though she might be about to come into labour, in my view, and I'd be a bit concerned about her. So Bossa went out on his horse and rode out towards the Bunyas, and sure enough finds this Aboriginal woman who has had a baby on her own, and the tribe has just walked on and said, we'll leave you here under this nice tree, and left her. So, and Jerry had alerted Bossa to the fact that this would appear to be likely, so they brought her back to town, the woman, and one of the nurses looked after her for a while, and the tribe just picked her up on the way back. About 3 months later they came back fat and shiny, after having gone across poor as crows, you see. So they dined royally on these bloody bunya nuts. But that didn't happen just once. It happened again a couple of years later. Same thing. So this is culture.
So tell us about Bella, who's buried here, since we're leaving it behind.
Well, I know very little about her, but she was one of the local tribe, and she worked at the pub in the laundry. And of course, when Aborigines die, I can't say this since from first-hand knowledge myself, but only from what my father and grandfather have said, that they tended to build a platform in a tree and leave the body for nature to look after itself. In other words, it would go rancid and rotten and weep everywhere. And there have been occasions that I know of personally in North Queensland where the son of some old Aborigine who died, they put him up in the tree and he sat under, getting soaked with this juices coming out of the dead body.
Yeah.
And it caused great angst to the lady who was on her own at this particular property where the husband had to be away for a few weeks on the job, and all of this happened. But anyhow, as far as Warrior goes, I know that of a couple of sites right here where that happened, because the platform was still up when I was a boy, still up in the tree. But by the time civilization came, when Bella died, they said, well, you know, she needs to be buried hygienically at least, and they wanted to know whether she could be buried here across the creek from the Bora ground. And that's what happened. She was buried up there. That's about all I know about her.
Who buried her? Her tribe.
Oh yes. They had a sing-song tribal, like sort of a, what do you call it? From town up a creek.
Procession.
Procession, that's right. Doing a sing-song all the way up to where they had dug the hole, restricted the specified 6 feet deep.
So have you heard any stories from your grandparents about when they first came here? Like they get here, they've got their land for a peppercorn. Then what? And there's tribes moving through this area.
That's right. Well, there's a
There's
tribe
a
that
Bora
lived here.
Lived here on this property.
No. Just across the highway, on this side of the creek, there was a blacks camp covering many acres.
And they moved here. When they took up land, when the settlers took up land.
The settlers took up land. It was all surveyed some years before. And then it was balloted out very often to people. The government would want to place people and become productive, and the Aborigines were happy to allow it to happen because it didn't seem to bother them. People bought sheep and pigs and whatever, and the Aborigines could do what they always did, eat the berries or whatever they did, shoot, do the kangaroos, and it was largely here, it was fairly close collaboration. However, on that subject, there was an incident because, first of all, there were large settlers, right? Squatters.
Like Jimba.
As they were called. Like Jimba.
Yeah.
And 3 or 4 others around Warra, like Warra was one. And on Warra, I don't know who was managing it. In my day, it was owned by a group from New South Wales, a rural owning group, not locally owned, but there was trouble out there. Aborigines had got into the livestock and killed them and took what they wanted and cooked them or whatever, and they were just helping themselves to the livestock, and they were told, hey, you can't do this. And the owners reported the matter to the police because the police station in town, and there were, at this time, and this was before our family came to the town, well back, there were Aboriginal policemen here. And they were told to go out and deal with the Aboriginals out in the Warrawara. The Aboriginal policemen were. And I don't know whether they were from a different tribe or how it all worked out, but they went out and killed them. The Aboriginal policemen went out and killed the Aborigines on Warrawara. So that's the worst experience of Aborigines around here. But
Thing unplugged itself.
by and large, the townspeople and the landowners and the otherwise in the immediate area got on perfectly well with them.
They called those the native police, didn't they?
That's right.
Yeah.
I got on pretty well with them, and as I say, plus I employed a few in the hotel, and he was quite a good friend of Jerry. We used to do jobs together, and of course during the Boer War was a major period. There were 300,000 horses killed in the Boer War because soldiers needed to be mounted to mount a charge and gain ground or whatever, and the enemy would absolutely immediately attack the horses to take the advantage away from the charge. So horses were pretty well expendable, and there was a big call in Australia for we need more horses. So Bosso got the contact with the army to break in horses for the Boer War, and eventually broke in 3,000 horses. And apart from being paid for the horses, he was also allowed to keep what he chose to be the best horse out of every 100.
Right.
And at the end of this deal, and after the war was over, he ended up with 30 prime horses, and it's like owning motor cars today, really. And he had 30 of them. And then the Federation drought hit the district, the worst drought that had ever been known to all these migrant Irishmen and whatever, and Germans. Of course, the place was thick with Germans all around the place, more than the British to some extent. Never struck this kind of thing. Everybody was overstocked with cattle, and the cattle were dying, and Bosso registered the horses as far as he reasonably could to other properties away from here that might have had a little bit of feed left. Eventually he lost all his horses in that drought except two he kept at home.
How tragic.
Two he kept at home. And one of the ways he kept them at home was to cut prickly pear and boil it.
Keep the horses alive.
Hand feed them.
Yeah.
And when I was a boy, they were still doing that, 1933, boiling prickly pear to supplement the feed to the horses in a very dry time. And the horses will eat thorns and all if it's been boiled.
Really?
I can manage it.
Wow.
Softens the thorn. Softens the
Softens
thorn.
it enough to allow them to do that.
I would have thought it would have been easy enough to sieve the thorns out.
Oh God, no.
No?
Prickly pear thorns are just insidious. They're like,
Yeah.
they get everywhere.
There's not only the big thorn, there's a whole cluster of these tiny fairy type thorns.
Yeah.
Oh, they're the worst, yeah. They're like barbed. They can get through leather gloves.
That's right.
I've got a cactus thorn in the top of my finger at the moment.
No good.
From barrel cactus I tried to move.
Yeah, you walk past a cactus bush and it's, you know about it for
It
weeks.
almost jumps at you.
Oh,
yeah.
it's okay.
So, that was that.
And he was tall, eh?
But yeah, the relationship with the Aborigines wasn't too bad. As you know, eventually, when was it? I forget now what
The
decade.
mile.
No, what decade it was that they set up Cherbourg,
Yeah.
so that any Aborigine who wanted to could move to Cherbourg, and I think they pretty well encouraged them to do so, where they were looked after. They didn't have to work for a living, and there was an entirely Aboriginal settlement up near Mergen.
So when was that Mile Creek massacre? Was that around here or somewhere else on the Mile?
Mile Creek's Dalby.
Right.
But I don't know that that's the mile or creek you're talking about. I'm not sure.
It is the Mile Creek, but it's. I don't think it's around here. But just.
Jerry Jerome, his mother, worked on infestation. And he didn't know who his father was. This is Aboriginal culture again. This is the way it was. He didn't know who his father was. And because of his build, there was a suggestion that he may have been partly Afro-American because of the build. Right? He was a bit more athletic.
Oh, there were Afro Americans out here.
There
then?
were some.
Slaves.
No, not slaves. No. Had found their way over here. And they were not slaves, no, not at all. But there were a lot of Aborigines on Jimma Station, of course. And some got work, of course, as cooks or horse attendants or whatever. Because the hotel, whereas these days you've got a car park and stables for about 8 or 10 horses. And there was always somebody that had to look after these horses for the guests. People
They
would ride
stumbled
up.
out drunk.
People would ride up. They'd come for many miles to
Have a
a
drink.
cattle sale on horseback, and they just hand over the horse to the what do you call them? The attendant anyhow.
Attendant.
The horse park valet.
Well, they had another name. I forget what it is. But they would look after the horse, take the saddle off,
Be the stable hand,
Right.
wouldn't
stable hand,
it?
rack up the saddle in the proper way so it wasn't just dumped, and the bridle and everything else, and usually brush and wash the horse down a bit as well, because they'd come in lathered and sweat quite often after a day's ride from somewhere. And there was a billiard room with the pub, separate little building, and a barber shop. And naturally it was
Andy.
Andy Best. That's right. You're right. Andy Best was keen on that. And he was not like my grandfather, quite different. And he brought up 2 sons and 2 daughters. One son got married and physically abused his wife. He was that sort of drunken lad. The elder son never got married. Why should he get married? Why? And what was the saying?
Why would you buy the cow after you've tried the milk or something?
Or something like that. No, that's not. They're similar.
Similar, yeah.
Why buy the thing if you can join the club or something like that?
Oh, yeah.
And 2 sisters who also never got married. They both worked in the telecom exchange as telephonists in Brisbane and locally. But Andy was the sort of guy that a bit of a what you call a main chancer, this could be $1 here, and throw a few dollars on this horse and see if we can get the jockey
He was a gambling man.
see if we can get the jockey to pull the horse or something like that.
Right.
And
Scammer.
so, as well as having the billiard room and barber shop,
He was
not the barber, by
he
the way.
was the town drunk.
No, not at all.
That's not what Andy tells me.
No, Andy wasn't the town drunk so much. He was the SP bookmaker. Illegal.
So the black sheep. Huh?
Bit of a bad cheap.
Andrew likes to throw in that he was the town drunk as well. Because your mum used to say to him, never let anyone call you Andy, because he was the town drunk and the hairdresser. Which is right up Andrew's alley. Running the billiards hall, being the hairdresser and the town drunk all at the same time.
So what did your mum think when you called Andrew Andrew?
Oh, you should quite happy about that. Yeah.
Just don't call him Andy.
Mandy.
No, don't call me Andy. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yes. But Granny Best, I do
I've never
remember.
heard about Andy before. Sorry, go on, no, never.
Grandfather
Tell that
Best, that is
story.
to say, my grandfather's father was the guy that built the first pub and store here. but he was married, of course, and Granny West was a lovely old lady. And she owned a house directly opposite the present pub with an open veranda on two sides facing the street.
Mm-hmm.
And she ran a coffee club because ladies would not be seen
At the pub.
at the pub.
She was a smart lady then.
She was a smart lady.
Provided entertainment
So
for
be-
the
So between the two of them,
they captured the full
they
market.
captured both sides of the market.
Mhm.
And and coffee, of course, was just one above tea.
Yeah, right.
De rigueur.
It was a new.
What year was that?
Oh, 20s.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
20s. She died, I think, in 33 or 4, and
Yeah.
I would have been 3 years old, but I do remember.
Yeah.
I do remember this fairly stout old lady that lived in that house. Yeah.
Interesting times.
The
It's
real.
so much more
much
exciting
has
than our lifetime, don't you think?
Oh yeah.
As I
Like
keep-
everything they had to live through and deal with, and
As,
Oh,
I will,
yeah.
as I will say on my website, I'm an alien from another world, the real world.
your website.
I know. I'm preparing. Dad and I are
this is
planning
the-
it. Dad's
right.
going to have a social media and become a social
Right.
media personality.
Yeah.
Yes. I've already taken a
the
couple of
real world.
videos.
That's the real world.
Well, it is. Yes. The world we live in is very protected and cushioned. and-
Okay.
Well, you would.
But isn't it the dream? Isn't the life we have led since the 50s? Wasn't that the dream and the vision of so many people for hundreds and hundreds of years, that one day we could live in peace, prosperity?
Well, I think the dream of people is
And
Slobbish complacency.
well, no, they never thought that would happen. They thought that as soon as people became peaceful and prosperous, they would be eternally grateful and live wonderful, fulfilled lives, which many, many people do. You can't
Self-motivated,
deny.
highly
You can't
educated.
deny that.
Well, remember that show on television? What was it? With that woman in it, To the Man of Born,
Yeah, yeah.
and it was all about noblesse oblige.
Noblesse oblige. Yes,
That's right.
but that was for the nobles, Dad.
Well, but the ambition of people
Well, that's
In
exactly. It's
in the
aspire
90s.
to that, to get to that, not have that breakdown of classism, so we can have access to those things.
Well, that's right. The ambition of everybody in the 19th century and the early 20th was to work hard, be honest and straightforward, not get yourself into any deep trouble,
Sewing, is it? No.
and acquire eventually enough financial mass to be independent of yourself. Never be a pensioner, never have to depend on the taxpayer and other people for sustenance and assistance, right? That was, you know, my father used to say, my father's probably has never had a mortgage.
Oh, wow.
We have never borrowed money from anybody.
Hmm.
Now that is
Okay,
very,
alright.
very bad business sense.
You going around there or what?
Very, very bad. Because he, once he got this property, could easily have bought out the neighbours. Whereas my neighbour is the one that bought out all his neighbours, and he now pulls in $1 million a year.
And he's borrowed money to get
And he
there.
borrowed money to get there.
Not good
So
business
that-
sense,
that
but an
business sense-
ideological.
But in the old days,
Yes.
it was de rigueur,
Yeah, yeah.
okay?
This thing
Don't ever.
So you have to save.
You have to save yourself.
Yeah, you have to save money to buy something.
Well, my father wouldn't marry my wife, my mother, sorry,
Mm.
sorry.
Because?
Until he owned a house.
Yeah, right.
And my mother said to me, I really felt I was never going to gain this man. I thought I was going to have to
she was
look
gonna-
elsewhere.
Yeah, right.
This was 5 years. I knew him closely. We never did a thing out of step at all. We always behaved with absolute
For 5 years.
respect
Yeah.
for everybody.
Well, he saved
Five.
to buy this house.
And then one day he says, "I've bought this house, will you marry me?"
Wow.
Cost £400.
Mm.
He only earned £2 a week,
Wow.
but he was living with his parents. And there was a town,
Oh well, there's nothing to spend your money on in those days, was there?
well, there was plenty. You could back the races,
Oh, you mean gambling?
or booze,
Mm.
or go around with your mates.
Yeah, but I
Player.
mean, do you know what? These days,
That's
it's
right.
really expensive to live
It
and
is.
to go out and do any of that
Oh, yes,
stuff.
it is,
Whereas
it
in those
is,
days,
yeah.
I think it was not so.
In the old days, there was a town reserve, and it was all the way from town up to the racecourse and back to the cemetery. Right? It would have been, I don't know, 100 acres or something. And it was available for the townspeople to have a house cow if they wanted.
A house cow.
A house cow.
What's
You
that
couldn't
mean?
fly to Germany for the weekend, that's for sure.
A house cow. You owned a cow,
Yeah.
and it had a calf,
Yeah.
which you then sold and kept milking the cow. So you always had milk.
Yeah.
When my father did get married,
Mm.
he was the second last of the family. He was the second last of a family of 6. And the parents' wedding present was, we will give you milk as long as we live.
That's pretty good.
They dairied here, and I had to come across from town here every day,
To get the fresh milk.
every afternoon, to get a 2-pound treacle tin full of milk.
You carry it back on your head.
No, I didn't. But that was immediately put on a cool shelf,
Yes.
and the cream was skimmed,
Can you
Yes.
from which sometimes we would make butter,
Yeah.
and we'd always have rice puddings and milk puddings and
Yeah, so
I
you're
was
spoiled.
spoiled. When I was born, I cried and
Yes,
cried
I
and
heard.
cried,
Yeah, yeah.
and there's no doubt it was due to being milk was the best thing you could possibly give a kid.
Yeah.
More milk, and not diluted milk.
Oh my
Ollie.
God! So you didn't have breast milk,
No, well, Mum couldn't breastfeed for long,
right?
Mm.
so
Cow's milk.
there you go. Whole different world, the real world. It's not always totally fun.
You were a colic baby, probably.
Yes, indeed. One night, I was crying into the night, and a woman across the road walked across the road in the dead of night, walked straight through into the house, picked me up.
Got her tits out. No, sorry. Sorry.
No, you're about 20 years too early.
That's another story.
Came out, took me out, walked up and down the footpath, nursing me until
To
I
put
was
you to
quiet.
sleep.
And then she came in, put me back in the bed and just looked at Mum and Dad and walked away.
Wow.
Before she got back across the street,
I
I,
would
was
imagine-
screaming again.
Oh,
So it didn't.
Wow, a distressed baby,
That's
eh?
right.
colic babies.
That's right.
Well, both my kids had that, but not all night. They used to go from 4 p.m. to 10 p.m.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I was lucky.
So maybe 10
I
p.m.
can't
was all night.
even imagine
Oh,
how hard it would have been.
But Dad used to have not only just the house cow, he'd have another cow and a calf. Because nobody's not going to argue with him, and not too many people did it. So he could run a couple of cows and calves, and then he'd, as soon as the calf was a yearling, he'd sell that off, bring the cow over here to the bull, another calf coming shortly. And this is why he saved for a house.
Wow. 3 cows.
Well, it's part of it.
Wow.
I mean, you would do.
so he wasn't doing Uber Eats at the time. Sorry.
No. No. But you can
I'm
do
not
it.
putting-
As long as you apply yourself to what you're going to do, you can do it. So they had a house fully paid for the day they were married.
Yeah, so this is what
£400.
I'm thinking is, see, back in those days when people literally almost struggling for survival.
Very struggling.
Not to stay alive, but to be decent.
Oh yes.
Struggling to
That's
be
right.
decent.
Oh yes.
That is motivation.
That's right.
Because your father had to struggle
That's right.
to save
Oh right.
to have a woman
Oh yes.
in a
That's right.
moral society where you couldn't have a woman any other way.
Yep. Well, of course,
Well, he could have had her.
she worked in
Because
Dolly.
Not
she would
really,
have, she would have
because-
said yes. It was him that said,
No,
I don't want to
no.
marry
If a
you.
woman gave in to a man, she'd just be indecent. and
No,
her life
but
would be
they
ruined.
would have got married before he had a house.
Oh, yeah.
He was the one who said, I'm not going to marry you until I've got a house
And he
for
didn't
you.
Yeah,
tell
yeah.
her this.
Proud.
He
Yes.
didn't tell her
Proud.
that though, so she didn't know what was
She,
going
by
on.
the way, lived out here, about 5 miles out, on the property with her parents.
Oh.
He had remarried. Her mother died,
Yeah, I know that story. So
and she was
she was like
step-
Cinderella.
stepdaughter, a bit like Cinderella, and her father, you know, her blood father, had supported her for 16 years. Supported her for 16 years, and when she turned 16, he said, "Now you owe me 16 years.
Yeah.
God, so
You need to work here."
So she left, of course, as an indentured slave.
That's right.
Yeah.
So one night, there was a cream carrier came past, and she said, "Would you take me to town?" She got into town.
Amazing story. Because if you ever knew my grandmother, she's so meek.
That's right, very, very meek and very, very
So
humble,
it must have been horrible.
and
Yeah.
and determined all her life never to upset anybody, always to be, you know. And this is the way she was brought up, I suppose, to some extent. But her mother was that influence. But anyhow, she managed to get a lift to Dolby. With, I think it might have been the other cream carrier, because the Dolby cheese factory, butter factory, so it was in Dolby. And she got a lift, bummed a lift. And she applied at Russell Hotel for a job. And the woman just took pity on her and said,
Gave her a job,
"Oh,
luckily.
we'll give her a job. Right, you got to do this, you got to do that."
And a room, no doubt.
Well, this is right.
Sure, it was a
And
room and a job.
Room and
Yeah,
meals,
yeah, yeah,
room and
yeah.
meals and a job,
Yeah,
roof
yeah.
over her head by
Yeah,
God.
yeah.
And she had to make all the beds and sweep and do all the
Yeah.
dirty work around the place and
Yeah.
whatever. And she did that beautifully. She'd been
The
there.
parents never came looking for her.
She'd been there a few weeks, and the father turns up, speaks to the hotel manager, and said, "Her wages have got to come to me. Her wages have to come to me." And the woman said, "Go away, Mr. Kajewski. Go away." So
And that was brave of her too.
it was because, you know.
Mm.
Anyhow, during that 5-year courtship, she eventually moved.
So that was the end of it. He went away. Was never heard of again.
The evil
father.
Father, we didn't come back.
Wow.
He couldn't. What could he do?
I don't know.
She moved to the Windsor Hotel and was very well treated there because she did a pretty good job.
Yeah.
And
I bet she did.
she met
Bet
this.
she was as neat as a pin.
That's right. and
Starching
she
everything
met this
inside.
smart bloody footballer guy. Oh, Dobby Best.
Dobby there.
Yeah,
They call him Dobby because there was a guy in town who had a mechanics shop. Bill Dobby, his name was. And when Dad was very young, I said, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" He said, "I want to be Dobby."
so they call him Dobby.
So they called him Dobby thereafter.
Poor guy.
So that's the family
Cool.
history.
Interesting.
So that was Hilda who
That's
ran
Hilda.
away from a.
That was Hilda.
Her
Oh.
mother bled to death on the floor in front of her in a drover's cottage
Yep.
when she was 4.
From what? Childbirth?
Childbirth.
Father away driving,
Yeah, right.
home alone with kids,
Yeah.
dead
So-
mother in the house.
And
Did the
milking.
child so the child didn't survive either?
No,
Obviously not.
Yeah.
no. And she was milking all the cows while her husband was away. And on this particular day it had been raining, and she's going from one shed to the other with 2 buckets full of milk, slipped on a rock, a wet rock, or a mossy rock.
God, just so visceral.
Because it was up behind Derby
This is
towards the
only my
mountains where it was a
grandmother.
bit showery sort of weather in the hills. That's right.
How long before he got back?
A couple of days.
God.
She lay in the bed in the pool of blood.
That's right. So there's his father who has to work and drove. Left his kids, he can't really die.
So then was Hilda like the oldest? So was she then became the mother, or
no,
there
she
were
was
other?
young. She
No,
was
no, no,
four.
she
Yeah,
was very,
okay.
very young.
Okay,
Yeah, the older
so there
sister.
was oldest. So then
Yeah.
they had to take over the
So
household.
the father remarried quickly,
Yeah, right.
as
Okay,
they
of course.
did. Get a woman
Of
in,
course,
look
because-
after the kids.
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know.
okay.
And the mother
She was
like an
horrible.
evil stepmother.
Yeah, right.
Made my grandmother work in the fields with the boys and
Yeah.
looked after the girls in the house and sort of treated her as other.
Yeah.
Yep.
And the father, of course, just needed a woman there, so he
Yeah.
didn't stick up for her as it goes. And he sounds like he was an arsehole anyway. But
There's an arsehole.
anyway, my grandma used to tell me these stories. Were sort of it's terrible.
This is the
So
real.
she, as soon as she met my grandfather, she has just been in love ever since. Just loyal and devoted and servile almost. You know, everything he said was like God had spoken.
But they
Never
were
crossed
not.
him.
He was obviously a kind man.
Yeah,
Her
he was
dad.
very
Yeah,
charismatic
yeah,
and
kind man.
very
she probably
popular.
hadn't had that.
and
But they
lovable.
used to. I mean, it wasn't that kind of relationship though.
You mean servile? Is that
No,
what you mean?
not at all.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It was, in my entire experience of it, it might have been different when you were growing up.
Well, I can remember, going off to school, and Dad would be going to work a lot earlier than school, of course. Although the shop I didn't open till 9 o'clock, he would always be there early and open up and make sure everything is ship shape. And they would always have a cuddle behind the door.
Oh, they were loving. I'm not saying they weren't loving, but it was very much a traditional relationship. The
But don't you think that's indicative of that era, though?
Oh, of course,
Yeah, yeah.
That's right.
But she came home with, in the 20s or the 30s, they were trying on lip rouge, and she never drove. Never drove a
Sure,
car.
but I'm sure that
driven.
wasn't unusual.
No.
I'm not criticising them.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
just
okay.
saying it was an incredibly.
Didn't own a car until 1951. 20
My
years
my
after
grandmother could not.
And Phil doesn't drive either.
That's right.
Yeah,
marriage. Oh, right.
but he catches Ubers on his own. I don't think Grandma would have ever done that. Very different. So I can totally understand, but it's like she. By the time I came to know her, she was so devoted to nurture of children and family. She literally could not have a discussion about anything apart from who needs food right now, who needs something washed, who needs a bed made. She was.
I
her
don't
life
think,
was-
again, that was uncommon.
I'm not saying it was
Yeah, yeah,
uncommon.
yeah.
I'm saying that the difference between the life she led and the way I and my peers were starting to think in the 70s, the dawn of feminism and all of that was just eons apart. And I could never really have a conversation with her. That's what I'm saying. I could never sit down and chat with her because all she wanted to know is, am I going to be a nice girl so I can get a good husband, so I can have a life like hers?
Sure.
And I looked at her life and I thought, well, that's great. You're the only two people I've ever known in my entire life who've ever been that in love. You're a standout, but that's not how it is for 98% of the world. And, but I love, she was adorable. She was an adorable woman. And she was a nurturer. She was just your traditional. She was
My grandmothers
passionate.
were like that. It was
She was-
always about, what can I feed you?
Yes.
Can
She
I
was-
get you this?
She was
And my
passionate.
fondest memories of my grandmother was when I used to go and stay with her, and she would bath me and powder me from
Yeah.
head to toe. She would give me freshly
Care
squeezed
of children
orange
and
juice
house, and
with
it was-
sugar in it.
It was her pleasure and
Yeah,
privilege.
yes, it's different.
But when you look at the life she had, you can understand why it was her pleasure and privilege to be married to Grandad, nurturing children, bringing up children, living a life of kindness
That's right.
with enough money to live a decent life, which was everything to her. Everything. She was like she was in seventh heaven.
That's right.
Cool. So she was happy,
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah, totally.
which is all that you can ask for someone's life, really.
Yes,
That
I
they're
know.
happy.
I know,
Yeah.
but it's so different. It's a very hard thing to explain to a hardcore feminist these days.
Sure.
Very hard. They
I
go,
don't-
oh well, she was just a, you know, a subject of the patriarchy.
Anyone who denies that life was different and roles were different in those days is taking it all too far. Like,
yeah.
do you know what I mean?
I totally agree.
Like, it was different,
I totally agree.
and things have evolved and things have changed. And but yeah, I don't think you can get
Well,
angry or
It had to be
be
different.
crazy about it
Yeah, yeah.
because
But
it just was different.
Yeah, I know.
Because you had to survive mainly as well.
You can have my seat.
You
Are
okay?
you okay, sweetheart? You've got red patches on your face.
Maybe it was the champagne.
Do you want to go to bed?
Oh no, she was up later than me last night.
Yeah, but she
Mm.
tends to want to
Stay up.
not settle down until everyone else is
Oh,
taken
yeah.
care of because we have the same syndrome going around here.
Yes.
Okay, so that's the end of the story.
That's the real world.
Okay. Have you got any final words?
No,